Today we're studying the fifth of six Virgo expressions. This one's called responsibility. Now, if we backtrack a little, in the studying of Virgo, we begin with conviction. And this is when we make our first decision about what is significant to us. And if you think back in your lifetime, there were various definite points when you had to make a decision about this or that, this career or that career, this relationship or that possibility, and so on. So we had to work out criteria of choice. What do we find most significant? So building on that, we came to creating some kind of vision. What are we going to do about that? And that's the first expression of Virgo, having conviction. Because when you've got conviction about what's significant and what you're going to do about it, off you go. It's very difficult to be motivated if you don't have those things. Secondly, we come to terms with the life force, where at one point it's like a merry-go-round. It's just really, really busy and we can't cope. And then there's another point when it's just boring and we just can't find anything to worth doing, and that's how it is. And we have to adapt to that. And what it is that it adapts is I change who I am in order to cope with the ups and downs of life. And as we do that, we come to a deepening of our sense of reality. And we get a sense of not only is it busy or boring, it's also practical or idealistic. It's also spiritual or material. There are various polarities that we have to come to terms with. And these impact upon us quite strongly. And then we come to the third expression of Virgo, which reorientation describes as changing your direction to face east. That's what Loic said a couple of weeks ago. It's lovely, isn't it? And it reminds me of the Sufi word Bismillah. It's the same thing, like this is new. East is new. It's the Orient. It's where the sun comes up. It's a new beginning. It's spiritual, it's mystical. And Bismillah in Sufism has the same principle. If you say it now, Bismillah, it means I begin. I begin in the name of God. I begin aware of universal presence. In other words, nothing that has passed exists. Everything that was isn't. It's just entirely liberating. And that's the sense that we have of reorientation. And we have reorientation away from the mother that wanted you to be a certain way, and towards a greater sense of the family tree, the ancestors, and even the cultural norms that you're starting to represent rather more than the family. Then over the previous 2 weeks, we've been looking at cultivation. And we started with the orangutan and the volcanic eruption, where these wild energies, these expressions of nature are not out there, over there on a natural history documentary. We have them, and we have to do something with that. And the motivation that we have to have a life, have a exciting, motivated life, comes from this natural burst of energy. And eventually we come to realize that unless we contain that and cultivate a correct relationship so that the wildness and the disciplined orderliness of life meet. And this is what you see in a garden, where nature is never tameable. But if you just leave it to its own devices, it's a jungle, you can't cope. So the cultivation is like growing a garden. And it's like that with us. If we allow ourselves freedom to do anything we want to do, there's no place for us. Whereas if we want a place, we need to both celebrate our wildness so that we've got something to give, some energetic input, and also contain some of the unwanted excesses of that. And that's what we were learning last time with cultivation. Now, when we come to responsibility, I'll read some text out here. Becoming a better person is central to the seeker's path, the outer training, proof that spiritual practices are being properly assimilated. Just think about what we said. Becoming a better person is central to the seeker's path, the outer training, proof that spiritual practices are being properly assimilated. In other words, we're not just talking about all of this stuff. It must make a difference, or it's the wrong stuff. And what's the major difference that it makes is that we become a better person. There's no statement here about the criteria to measure what is better. It's probably something that this sort of interaction of cultivation would tell us, that what we want and what the community wants have both to be taken into account. We need to be part of a group at times to touch into states of consciousness that we cannot reach alone. By doing so and exercising great strength of will, we can elevate ourselves individually to the condition of responsibility, and then attract both the duties and the social recognition required to fulfill them. The danger of egotism needs to be offset by the deepening of innocence and invariably service. The fruits of our inner work are twofold. The outer attainments may well attract glory for a while, yet the inner benefits have eternal value. Now, we're starting to talk about responsibility here as a spiritual principle. The first thing for us to understand is that responsibility is a polarity in juxtaposition of one other thing. And if you don't know what that other thing is, you're not going to understand responsibility. Responsibility and authority go hand in glove. Authority requires us to have responsibility for our power. Responsibilities cannot be discharged unless we've got decision-making capabilities. We have to make our judgment calls in order to fulfill any responsibility that we might have. And so when we're talking about responsibility, we're talking about what to do with the authority we have appropriately to discharge our responsibilities. So if we look at the 5 Sabian symbols, putting community goals above personal ambition, a girls' basketball team, prepares us for high-level responsibility, a royal coat of arms, and the overcoming of prideful self-love, an animal trainer, a lion tamer. The spiritual practice of innocence, Mary and her white lamb, supports exceptional community service, a flag at half-mast. So the girls' basketball team, that kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? Any team that you're in is more important than the individual players that make up that team. And it's coming to terms with the fact that we choose to engage with the collective in order to enrich and expand our own lives. The cost of that, if you consider it a cost, is to just diminish your own self-importance a little bit for the game. You know, you won't get picked again next week if you hog the ball. You know, nobody will want to play with you anymore. So it's being receptive to collective forces that binds a team together so that you play as a team, and you can't play meaningfully in life unless you're part of a team. So then we move on to the polarity principle of that. The first and the second points in any expression are the thesis and the antithesis of what we're examining. So here we're saying, yeah, the royal coat of arms, it couldn't be any further away from the team player, could it? I mean, the king is not a team player, you know, and so we've got this level of responsibility for high office here. Now, we all may, not all of us, but some of us will think, oh, the aristocracy, they've got it lovely and lucky and so on and so forth. But look what's going on in the news in the British royal family at the moment. I don't know if you're aware, but the king's brother, Andrew, has done some pretty disreputable things in his life, and he's being called to account now in a very, very serious and embarrassing way. It would kill most people to go through what he's having to go through because of what he's done. But if he was not a member of the royal family, it would just be nothing, trivialized, you know. So the responsibility of high office is that you're accountable at the very highest level for what you do. That's something to take into account. So as we move forward in our career or visionary movements and claim some position, some authority, there's a price. There's always a price, and that is that you're responsible for the outcome. The highest version of this is that each of us is the authority for the lives that we have. That's what agency is, that the life that you lead is yours. You've created it and you're responsible for it. The ultimate level of responsibility is to claim agency for every aspect of your life experience. Now, in the third position of any 5 degrees of an expression, we're trying to reconcile the first two. So how do you overcome the royal coat of arms risk of being arrogant beyond the law? How do you overcome that and become a team player without reneging on your responsibility of holding aristocratic office? Because the aristocrats are actually necessary. You can call them whatever you like, but communism just doesn't work. And even if communism as it's defined does work, they still got the elite, the party members and so on. You know, there's always an aristocracy. And that's because not everybody, in fact, not many, are willing to claim and take responsibility. There will always be those who take responsibility, and that is the aristocrat, whether it's backed up by a royal coat of arms or not. Now, here we have the animal trainer, overcoming pride. Taming the beast within us is a requirement if we are to maintain an aristocratic demeanor. Very similar, isn't it, to cultivation last time? Very similar. And here we have why we needed to cultivate that ability to discipline our own emotional nature, to control our hormonal behaviors. And one of the obvious things that we do is to allow the ego to express itself in an overblown way. The ego is a requirement for individuality. It's not in any way unspiritual to have an ego. But when your ego is raised in importance in your mind over anyone else's, then that's egotism, and that is prideful self-love, and that doesn't create any happiness anywhere. So overcoming that in order for you to reconcile responsibilities and the temptations of thinking that your authority that goes along with that makes you special. That's next. So that's the animal trainer. Now, when we get to the fourth expression point, here we have Mary and her white lamb. And this is where we've mastered this energy, this wisdom. We've mastered it. We know what to do with it. And what does that lead to? Well, Mary and her white lamb signifies the purity of spirit. Despite having a nobility of demeanor and a powerful will, the more advanced seeker is able to radiate innocence and purity, holding on to a childlike simplicity of being. That's a very special elevated quality that our community dignifies at a very high level. Even the greatest of spiritual teachers are somewhat wanting sometimes in this sense of innocence and purity. We haven't got very many models of people who were like that. Some, yeah, Francis of Assisi, perhaps, Buddha and Christ, I'm sure, and there are some, but it's a very, very special quality. And this reaching up to find spirit is actually that for which you require humility. It's spiritual consciousness, being aware of purity of being, is a certain type of vibration, like everything is. And the type of vibration that we're discussing here, the purity, like Mary and her white lamb, that kind of purity of being, you can't access that vibe except through humility. Humility is not it itself, but it's a necessary condition in order to move to that higher dimension of spiritual clarity. And this really is where what responsibility is. As a person, each of us is responsible for what we get in life. All of our perceptions, that comes from us. We're not able to hold anyone else responsible for what we get in our lives, even to the extent of the wars that go on in distant countries and so on. We choose to look at the news and get that information. If that was something we did not do, then we wouldn't have that as a part of our perceptual reality. So whatever we get from looking at YouTube videos about others' mad misfortunes, that's a part of who we are. I'm very careful sometimes when a YouTube video comes up about how bad it's getting in England. I think, oh, I want to know what's happening in my country. But it turns into a kind of almost a pornography of poverty that they're selling. Look how bad it is. Look how people are suffering. And it just feels wrong to notice that, to look at that. I mean, I have to know what's going on, but there's a very thin line between overindulgence in that and denial of that. And so what we're talking about here is that innocence that you bring to a situation where you're not in danger of getting off on somebody else's misfortune. You're naturally radiating compassion. And even to the rich ones that are the abusers and the arrogant ones, and the people like Prince Andrew, the truly innocent person would understand that it's not very easy to be a prince, especially the second most important prince. That must be terrible, and he's buckled under the pressure. They would see it that way, very forgiving. And that at the highest level is what Jesus was teaching, the highest level of responsibility is the purity of spirit. And then we come to the fifth point of this expression, Virgo 25, the flag at half-mast. I don't know if it's the same in your culture, but in the culture that this book is based on, if somebody important dies, the national flag is lowered and put at half-mast. Is everybody familiar with this principle? Yeah. So that means that someone who we really value has just passed, and it's the valuing of that person that we're saying that's the highest level of community approval. Like in England, it was Winston Churchill. When he died, everybody went crazy, and Princess Di as well. And that's because they did things that we all feel very, very grateful for or honor. We approve of their behavior one way or another. So that's community approval, Virgo 25.